AITA for telling my former interviewer that his wife needs to keep her mouth shut about my job interviews? I'm shaking as I write this because I just sent what might be the most professionally risky email of my career, and I need to know if I completely screwed up or if I was justified. This whole mess started 7 years ago, but it came to a head this morning in the most humiliating way possible. Let me give you some background. I live in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and gossip spreads faster than wildfire. There's this company here, Meridian Tech, that's basically the holy grail of employers in our area. They pay well, have amazing benefits, and most importantly, they're one of the few places where you can actually build a serious career without having to move to the big city. 7 years ago, when I was 26 and desperately trying to climb out of an entry-level position that was slowly crushing my soul, I saw a posting for a marketing coordinator role at Meridian. It was perfect, exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been dreaming about. The salary was nearly double what I was making, the job description read like it was written specifically for my skill set, and the company had a reputation for promoting from within. I spent weeks preparing my application. I researched the company inside and out, customized my resume to match every requirement they listed, and even drove by their office building a few times just to get a feel for the place. When they called me for an interview, I was so excited I literally jumped up and down in my kitchen. The interview process was intense, 3 rounds over the course of a month. First was a phone screening with HR, then a panel interview with the marketing team, and finally a one-on-one with David Chun, the marketing director, who would be my boss. David was probably in his late 40s, incredibly sharp, and had this way of asking questions that made you really think. I felt like I nailed every interview. During that final interview with David, we really connected. We talked about marketing strategy, about the company's growth plans, about my vision for where I could contribute. He seemed genuinely impressed with my ideas, and I left feeling more confident than I'd ever felt after an interview. But then came the waiting. Days turned into a week, then 2 weeks. Finally, David called with the news. They'd decided to go with another candidate. Someone with more experience, he said. He was very kind about it, said I'd been a strong contender and to please apply again in the future if other opportunities arose. I was devastated. This wasn't just any job rejection. This felt like my one shot at the career I wanted, and I'd blown it somehow. I spent weeks analyzing every moment of those interviews, wondering what I'd said wrong or what I could have done differently. I eventually moved on, took a position with a smaller company in town, and slowly built my career. But I never forgot about Meridian Tech, and I never stopped checking their job postings. Fast forward to this year. I'm 33 now, with 7 more years of experience under my belt, a solid track record, and honestly, I'm pretty damn good at what I do. When I saw that same marketing coordinator position posted again, apparently whoever they hired 7 years ago had moved on, I couldn't resist applying. Part of me thought it might be awkward, applying to the same company that had rejected me before. But the rational part of my brain said this was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been building toward. I had so much more to offer now. To my surprise and delight, they called me in for interviews again. This time, the process was even more thorough, 4 rounds instead of 3. There was the initial phone screening, then a skills assessment test, then a panel interview with the current marketing team, and finally another one-on-one with David Chun, who was still the marketing director. Seeing David again was surreal. He didn't immediately recognize me, which stung a little, but when I mentioned that I'd interviewed for a similar position years earlier, his face lit up with recognition. "Oh my goodness, yes," he said. "I remember you now. You had some really innovative ideas about customer segmentation. I'm so glad you decided to apply again." That made me feel incredible. Not only did he remember me, but he remembered me positively. The interview went even better than the one 7 years ago. I was more confident, more experienced, and I could tell David was impressed with how I'd grown professionally. We talked about specific projects I could take on, about the team dynamics, about the company's new initiatives. At one point, he said something that made my heart soar. "I have to say, your experience level now is exactly what we were looking for back then. Timing is everything, isn't it?" I left that interview feeling like the job was mine. Everything had gone perfectly, and David had practically told me I was qualified now in a way I hadn't been before. But then, once again, came the waiting. This time I tried to manage my expectations. I told myself not to get too excited, that there could be other strong candidates, that sometimes these things just don't work out. 2 weeks later, David called with the news. Once again, they decided to go with another candidate. I was professional on the phone, thanked him for the opportunity, and asked if there was any feedback that might help me in future applications. David paused for a moment, then said something that confused me. "Your qualifications were excellent," he said. "Really, you were probably our strongest candidate technically. But we needed someone who could start immediately, and when you mentioned needing time to give proper notice at your current job, well, the other candidate could start right away." I was stunned. During the interview, when David had asked about my availability, I'd been honest and said that if offered the position, I'd want to give my current employer 2 weeks' notice, 3 at most, to wrap up some projects I was leading. I thought that was not just professional but expected. Apparently, it had cost me the job. That rejection stung even more than the first one. 7 years earlier, I wasn't qualified enough. Now, I was too qualified to be desperate, I guess. I took a few days to wallow, then forced myself to move on. I told myself that maybe it wasn't meant to be, that the right opportunity would come along eventually. I didn't tell many people about the interviews, just my best friend and my mom. At work, I'd been discreet about the whole thing, taking vacation time for the interviews and not mentioning to anyone that I was looking elsewhere. My current job isn't terrible. It's not my dream position, but it pays the bills and my boss is decent. I've been there for 4 years now, and while there's not much room for advancement, it's stable. Given how the job market can be, I know I'm lucky to have steady employment. That brings me to this morning, and where this whole story goes completely off the rails. I was in the break room around 10 a.m., making my second cup of coffee and trying to gear up for a particularly boring budget meeting when my coworker Lisa came bouncing over with that look on her face. You know the one. The look that says, "I have gossip and I can barely contain myself." Lisa and I are friendly, but not particularly close. She's nice enough, but she's also the type who knows everyone's business and isn't always great at keeping confidences. Still, she's harmless and we chat about work stuff and weekend plans pretty regularly. "Oh my God," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. "You'll never believe what I heard at book club on Friday." I should mention that Lisa is in this book club with about 8 other women from around town. They meet every 2 weeks, supposedly to discuss whatever literary masterpiece they've chosen, but from what I can tell, it's mostly an excuse to drink wine and catch up on local gossip. "What happened?" I asked, not really paying attention as I stirred sugar into my coffee. "Well," Lisa said, lowering her voice to that conspiratorial whisper that somehow manages to be louder than normal talking, "you know how Janet Chen is in our book club, right?" I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Janet Chen. As in, married to David Chen, my former interviewer. She was telling us about this woman who applied for a job at her husband's company. Lisa continued, oblivious to the fact that my face had gone completely white. Apparently, this person interviewed there years ago and didn't get hired, then had the nerve to apply again recently for the same position. My stomach dropped to somewhere around my ankles.
She was talking about me.
Janet Chen was gossiping about my job interviews to her book club. "That's interesting," I managed to say, hoping Lisa would change the subject. But Lisa was just getting started. "I probably shouldn't say this," she said, which of course meant she was absolutely going to say it. But Janet told us the whole story. Apparently, this woman made it through all the interviews both times, but she just wasn't what they were looking for. I felt like I was going to be sick. Not only was David's wife discussing my private job interviews with her friends, but she was getting details wrong and making me sound pathetic. The first time, she wasn't experienced enough, Lisa continued, clearly enjoying having a captive audience. But then she applied again 7 years later for the exact same job. Can you imagine? Janet said her husband felt sorry for her, but they ended up hiring someone else anyway because this woman was being difficult about her start date. Difficult about her start date? The words came out sharper than I intended. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, apparently she wanted them to wait weeks for her to start, like she was doing them some huge favor by considering their job offer. Janet said it was pretty presumptuous. I was seeing red. Not only was Janet Chen spreading my business around town, She was completely misrepresenting what had happened. Wanting to give 2 weeks' notice wasn't being difficult or presumptuous. It was being professional. Anyway, Lisa said, Janet felt bad for whoever it was, but she said some people just don't know when to take a hint. She thought it was kind of sad that someone would put themselves through that rejection twice. That was the final straw. I mumbled some excuse about needing to get back to work and fled to my office, where I sat staring at my computer screen trying to process what had just happened. My private job search, something I'd been incredibly discreet about, was apparently common knowledge in Janet Chen's social circle. Worse, it was being discussed as some kind of pathetic cautionary tale about delusional job seekers who don't know their place. I spent the rest of the morning in a fog of humiliation and anger. Every time someone walked by my office, I wondered if they'd heard the story too. Our town isn't that big, and gossip has a way of spreading through multiple social networks pretty quickly. By lunchtime, I was furious. This wasn't just embarrassing, it could actually damage my reputation professionally. What if word got back to my current boss that I'd been interviewing elsewhere? What if other potential employers in town heard Janet's twisted version of events and decided I was some kind of desperate job hopper? But more than that, I felt violated. Job interviews are supposed to be confidential. I trusted David to keep our conversations private, and instead his wife was turning my professional disappointments into entertainment for her book club. I tried to calm down, telling myself that maybe it would blow over. Maybe Lisa wouldn't tell anyone else. Maybe Janet would realize she'd been inappropriate and stop talking about it. Then Lisa stopped by my office around 3 p.m. I've been thinking about what I told you earlier, she said, and I'm realizing I probably shouldn't have repeated that story from book club. You won't say anything to anyone, will you? The irony was almost laughable. She was worried about discretion after she'd already spilled everything. Of course not, I said, because what else could I say? Good, Lisa said, looking relieved. I'd hate for it to get back to Janet that I was sharing book club gossip. She specifically asked us not to repeat it.
Wait, what?
She asked you not to repeat it?
I said.
Lisa nodded. She said her husband would be mortified if he knew she was talking about work stuff, and that we should keep it between us girls. But you know how it is. Sometimes these stories are just too interesting not to share. I was speechless. So Janet Chen knew she shouldn't be gossiping about her husband's interviews, had specifically asked her book club to keep quiet about it, and Lisa had decided to tell me anyway. That's when I realized the full scope of how badly this could go. If Lisa felt comfortable ignoring Janet's request for discretion and telling me, who else had she told? How many other people in town now knew about my failed job interviews? I sat in my office for another hour, stewing in anger and humiliation. Finally, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't let this slide and hope it would go away on its own. I drafted an email to David Chen. Then I deleted it and started over. Then I deleted that one too and started again. The problem was figuring out how to address this without sounding completely unhinged. How do you tell someone that their spouse is gossiping about confidential work matters without coming across as paranoid or vindictive? After probably 10 drafts, I finally settled on something that felt professional but firm. Hi David, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out about something concerning that came to my attention today. As you know, I've been very careful to keep our interview conversations discreet, given my current employment situation. However, I was surprised to learn today from a colleague that she had heard detailed information about my interview process with Meridian Tech from your wife, who apparently shared this information at a social gathering they both attend. My colleague proceeded to relay to me numerous specific details about both my recent interview and my interview from 7 years ago, including information about why I wasn't selected both times. She mentioned that your wife had asked their group to keep this information confidential, but obviously that didn't happen. I hope you can understand how concerned I am about this situation. Having details about my job search shared in social settings has the potential to impact my current employment and my professional reputation in our community. I'm not sure what can be done at this point, but I wanted to make you aware of what happened and ask that you ensure nothing further is shared about our conversations. Thank you for understanding. Best regards. My name. I read it over probably 15 times, tweaking words and second-guessing myself. Was I being too harsh? Not harsh enough? Would this make things worse? Finally, I just hit send before I could change my mind again. Within an hour, my phone rang. It was David. "I am so sorry," were the first words out of his mouth. "I just read your email, and I'm absolutely mortified. I had no idea Janet had shared any of this." His voice sounded genuinely distressed, which made me feel a little better. "I want you to know that I never discuss specific candidates with my wife," he continued. "I might mention in general terms that we're hiring or that interviews are going well, but I would never share names or details. I'm trying to figure out how she even knew." He paused, and I could practically hear him thinking. "Oh God," he said. "I think I know what happened. A few months ago, Janet asked me why I seemed stressed, and I mentioned that we were having trouble filling this position. I might have said something about how we'd had a really strong candidate who we couldn't accommodate because of timing issues, and how it reminded me of someone we'd interviewed years ago who had similar qualifications." "You mentioned me specifically?" I asked. "No, never by name," David said quickly. "But Janet she's very observant. And she has a good memory. If I mentioned that it was someone who had interviewed before, she might have put the pieces together from things I've said over the years." That made me feel slightly less betrayed, but still angry that Janet had felt free to share the information once she'd figured it out. "Regardless of how she knew," David continued, "she absolutely should not have discussed it with anyone else. I'm going to have a very serious conversation with her about this." "I appreciate that," I said. "But the damage might already be done. If one person from that group felt comfortable sharing it with me, despite being asked to keep it confidential, I have to assume others might share it too." David sighed heavily. "You're absolutely right. Is there anything I can do to help mitigate this? I could reach out to people we know in common, or—" "I don't think that would help," I said. "It might just draw more attention to it." We talked for a few more minutes, with David apologizing repeatedly and assuring me that he'd make sure Janet understood the seriousness of the situation. He also mentioned that if any future opportunities came up at Meridian Tech, this incident wouldn't impact my candidacy in any way. After we hung up, I felt both better and worse. Better because David had taken responsibility and seemed genuinely remorseful. Worse because the conversation had confirmed my worst fears. Janet had indeed figured out it was me and had shared identifiable information with her book club. The rest of the week was torture. Every conversation I had with coworkers, every meeting I attended, every casual interaction in the break room had me wondering, do they know? I found myself analyzing people's expressions and tone of voice for any sign that they'd heard the story. Lisa seemed to be avoiding me, which made me think she was regretting having told me in the first place. A few other coworkers asked if I was feeling all right because I seemed off, which made me paranoid that they'd heard something. By Friday, I was a wreck. I'd barely slept all week. I'd been snapping at people for no reason, and I'd made several uncharacteristic mistakes on projects because I couldn't concentrate. That's when my boss, Karen, asked me to stay after our team meeting. "Is everything okay?" she asked, closing her office door behind us. "You've seemed really stressed this week." For a moment, I considered telling her everything. Karen is a good boss and a decent person, and part of me thought she deserved to know that I'd been interviewing elsewhere, especially since it might come back to her anyway through the gossip mill. But I chickened out. "Just some personal stuff," I said. "Nothing that will affect my work." Karen studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. But if you need to talk, or if there's anything I can do to help, you know I'm here." I thanked her and escaped to my office, feeling like a coward. Over the weekend, I tried to distract myself with Netflix and cleaning my apartment, but I couldn't stop obsessing over the situation. I kept imagining worst-case scenarios, my boss finding out I'd been job hunting, and deciding I wasn't committed to the company. Other local employers hearing Janet's version of events and writing me off as difficult or delusional. The story spreading beyond Janet's immediate social circle until everyone in town knew about my professional failures. By Sunday night, I'd worked myself into such a state that I seriously considered looking for jobs in other cities, just to escape the potential embarrassment. Monday morning brought a new development that made everything worse. I was walking into the office when I ran into Mike from accounting in the parking lot. Mike is generally pretty quiet and professional, so I was surprised when he fell into step beside me and started making small talk. "How was your weekend?" he asked. "Fine, thanks. How about yours?" "Good, good. Hey, I heard through the grapevine that you might be looking for new opportunities. If you ever want to talk about the job market or interview strategies, let me know. I've been through a few career transitions myself." My blood turned to ice. Mike had heard I was job hunting. How many other people knew? "I'm not sure what you heard," I said carefully, "but I'm pretty happy where I am." Mike looked confused.
"Oh, sorry.
I must have gotten bad information." Forget I said anything. But the damage was done. If Mike had heard something, it meant the gossip had spread beyond Lisa and Janet's book club. It was probably all over our office by now. I spent that morning in a panic, wondering who else knew and what version of the story they'd heard. Every time someone looked at me, every whispered conversation that stopped when I walked by, every casual "how are you doing?" felt loaded with hidden meaning. By lunch, I couldn't take it anymore. I called my best friend Emma and told her the whole story. "You need to get ahead of this," Emma said when I finished. "Talk to your boss before she hears it from someone else." "But what if she fires me for looking for other jobs? What if she finds out from gossip and fires you for being dishonest?" Emma countered. "At least if you tell her yourself, you can control the narrative." Emma was right, but I was terrified. I'd been at my current job for 4 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and losing it would be a disaster. Still, I knew I couldn't keep living in fear of discovery. That afternoon, I asked Karen if I could speak with her privately. "I need to tell you something," I said, closing her office door. "And I should have told you earlier." Karen's expression grew serious. "Okay." A few weeks ago, I interviewed for a position at another company. It didn't work out. I wasn't selected, but I wanted you to hear it from me rather than through office gossip. Karen was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Is this about the Meridian Tech position?" My heart sank. She already knew. "How did you?" "Lisa mentioned something in passing," Karen said. She seemed to think it was common knowledge, but I got the impression she shouldn't have been talking about it. So Lisa had told other people besides me. Of course she had. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you up front," I said. "I wasn't actively looking to leave. This opportunity just came up, and I thought it was worth exploring." Karen nodded. "I appreciate you being honest with me now. Can I ask what made you consider leaving?" That led to a surprisingly productive conversation about my career goals, my frustrations with the limited advancement opportunities at our company, and what Karen might be able to do to help me grow in my current role. "I don't want to lose you," Karen said. "You're one of our strongest team members. Let me see what I can do about creating some new challenges for you here." I left her office feeling simultaneously relieved and embarrassed. Relieved that Karen had taken the news well, embarrassed that I'd had to have the conversation at all because of Janet Chen's loose lips. The rest of the week was relatively quiet. A few more people made casual comments that suggested they'd heard something about my job search, but nobody seemed particularly interested in making a big deal out of it. I thought maybe the worst was over. Then, this past weekend, I was at the grocery store when I ran into Sarah Martinez, who works in HR for one of the other big employers in town. "Hey," she said brightly. "I heard you might be back on the job market soon. We actually have a marketing position opening up next month that might be perfect for you." I was mortified. Sarah's company would be a logical next step in my career, and under normal circumstances, I'd be thrilled to hear about an opportunity there. But the fact that she'd heard about my situation through gossip made me feel like damaged goods. "I'm actually pretty happy where I am right now," I said, which wasn't entirely true, but felt like the safest response. "Oh," Sarah said, looking confused. "I heard you were actively looking." My mistake. Another awkward conversation about my professional life with someone who shouldn't have known anything about it. That brings me to this morning, when I woke up with a sudden, horrible realization. What if David's wife is still talking about me? It had been over a week since I'd emailed David, and he'd promised to talk to Janet about keeping information confidential. But what if she didn't take it seriously? What if she was still discussing my situation with other people? The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. Janet Chun is involved in a lot of community organizations, the book club, the PDA, a women's networking group, her church committee. If she'd shared my story with one group, who's to say she hadn't shared it with others? I decided I needed to send a follow-up email to David. Maybe that makes me seem paranoid or vindictive, but I felt like I had to do something to protect myself. This time, my email was shorter and more direct. Hi, David. I wanted to follow up on our conversation last week about information regarding my interview being shared inappropriately. Since we spoke, I've had several more people in town approach me about my job search, suggesting that information about my situation continues to circulate in our community. This ongoing spread of what should have been confidential information is causing me significant professional and personal stress. I need to be very clear. Any further discussion of my employment situation, interview process, or professional circumstances by anyone connected to Meridian Tech could seriously damage my career and reputation in this small town. I trust that you understand the seriousness of this situation and will take whatever steps are necessary to ensure complete discretion going forward. Thank you. My name. I sent it about an hour ago, and now I'm second-guessing myself. Was I too aggressive? Will this hurt my chances of ever being considered for positions at Meridian Tech in the future? Should I have just let it go and hoped the gossip would die down on its own? But I keep coming back to the fundamental issue. I had a right to expect that my job interviews would remain confidential. The fact that David's wife figured out it was me and then shared that information with her social circle is a serious breach of professional boundaries. I also can't shake the feeling that if I don't push back on this, it will just encourage more gossip. Janet needs to understand that her actions have real consequences for real people. My phone hasn't rung yet, so David hasn't responded to my second email. Part of me hopes he'll call to apologize again and assure me that he's handled the situation. Another part of me worries that I've crossed a line and made an enemy of someone influential in my town's business community. The whole thing has made me realize how vulnerable you are when you live in a small town. In a big city, if someone gossips about your personal business, it might spread through your immediate social circle but probably won't affect your professional life. Here, everyone knows everyone, and a story told in one context can easily make its way into completely different circles. It's also made me think about the casual way people share information about others, without considering the potential impact. Lisa probably didn't mean any harm when she told me about Janet's book club story. She might have even thought she was doing me a favor by giving me a heads up. But her decision to repeat gossip she'd been specifically asked to keep confidential has caused me weeks of stress and professional anxiety. And Janet, I'm trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she didn't realize how identifiable the details she shared would be. Maybe she thought it was just an amusing anecdote about the hiring process. But the fact remains that she took private information about someone's professional life and turned it into entertainment for her friends. I keep wondering if I'm overreacting. Maybe this kind of thing happens all the time, and I'm being too sensitive about it. Maybe everyone talks about job candidates and interview processes, and I'm naive for expecting complete discretion. But then I think about how it felt to have Lisa casually tell me about my own failed interviews, with details I never shared with her, presented as some kind of cautionary tale about persistent job seekers. I think about having to explain to my boss why I was secretly interviewing elsewhere. I think about Sarah Martinez approaching me about job opportunities based on gossip rather than professional networking. None of that should have happened. And it all traces back to Janet Chen's decision to share information that wasn't hers to share. So now I'm sitting here, waiting to see if David will respond to my email, wondering if I've handled this situation appropriately or if I've made things worse for myself. The irony is that if I'd gotten the job at Meridian Tech, none of this would have mattered. Janet could have gossiped all she wanted about the candidate who got hired, and it wouldn't have affected me. But because I was rejected, her gossip has the potential to make me look desperate or difficult in a professional community where reputation matters enormously. I guess what I'm really asking is, did I have the right to demand discretion about my failed job interviews? Was I justified in pushing back against Janet's gossip, even if it meant potentially burning bridges with an influential local employer? Or should I have just accepted that this is how small towns work, kept my mouth shut, and hoped the talk would eventually die down on its own? TLDR, I interviewed twice for the same dream job at a local company over 7 years, got rejected both times. Found out the interviewer's wife was gossiping about my pathetic job search history to her book club, calling me difficult and presumptuous. The gossip spread around town, affecting my current job and professional reputation. I sent 2 increasingly firm emails to the interviewer demanding his wife stop talking about my private business. Now I'm wondering if I went too far or if I was justified in demanding discretion about confidential interview information. AITA for telling him his wife needs to keep her mouth shut about my job search?